In the second installment of Mafia, just like in the first one, the story was told to us in the form of flashbacks. In the first part, this flashback was presented based on a kind of confession made by Thomas Angelo. Namely, Thomas exposed a crime family to law enforcement authorities, telling Detective Norman juicy details from behind the scenes of the Salieri Mafia's activities. All this to protect himself and his loved ones. In turn, the flashback was built based on a classic short story in Mafia 2. The author of the story is Vittorio Antonio Scaletta, the main character of the game. Vito was born in 1925 in Sicily. However, due to poor living conditions, his family was forced to emigrate to the United States in search of a better life at some point. When they arrived, it quickly turned out that what Empire Bay had to offer, a fictional metropolis modeled on New York, was unfortunately far from ideal. However, the family began to settle in the new place over time. Vito was sent to school, where he met his best friend, Joe Barbaro, with whom he started committing smaller thefts. Unfortunately, one of them did not go according to plan. Vito was caught while Joe managed to escape. To avoid prison, Vito agreed to the offer he couldn't really refuse, which was to go to the front line during World War II. When he was there, Vito took part, among others, in Operation Husky, in which he had the opportunity to visit his home country. That is probably the first moment when the protagonist kind of comes into contact with the Mafia and meets the influential Don Callo, who saves his life. That's because when Vito's unit got into trouble, Don Callo appeared on the scene and ordered the exchange of fire to stop. Everyone obeyed him without hesitation, thanks to which Vito was not finished off by enemy troops. It was then that Vito saw for the first time how powerful the Mafia could be, even against heavily armed soldiers, of course, given that it was led by a charismatic leader with great authority. Sometime later, during one of Vito's next actions, he was shot. Ironically, thanks to this event, he was granted leave and returned to Empire Bay for a while. Vito returns home. An old friend Joe is waiting for him on the platform and takes Scaletta for a drink. In the bar, Vito tells Joey the reason for his return, and also mentions that he will have to return to the front soon. However, Joe Barbaro, thanks to his connections, arranges for Vito to be permanently dismissed from service in the end. Happy Vito rushes straight home to meet his loved ones, have a dinner together, some conversations, and a well-deserved sleep. The next day, Vito tells his mother that he does not have to return to the army. When Vito's mother finds out that Joe is behind all this, she immediately becomes worried. Vito somehow reassures his mother by telling her that there is no chance that this could turn out to be anything worse than returning to the front, where it is very easy to die. Vito's mother asks her son to go to the docks and talk to a certain Pappalardo, for whom Vito's father, who has been deceased for some time, used to work. After leaving the house, Vito witnesses a fight between his sister, Frankie, and some thug. Vito defends his sister by severely beating the attacker. It turns out that Vito's relatives owe a debt to the house, so further visits by similar thugs are only a matter of time. Vito decides to see if Joe will help him get money to pay off his family's debts. After reaching Mr. Barbaro's apartment, the main character realizes that Joe is currently doing quite well. Moreover, Joey wants to provide Vito with a well-paid job and allows him to stay at his house as long as Vito wants. Everything is starting to look better. Vito and Joey then go to the retired safecracker and counterfeiter Giuseppe to collect the papers, thanks to which Vito will not be sent to the army again. Scaletta receives the documents and acquires the ability to break into vehicles, thanks to which he steals a wonderful car for himself a moment later. Going further, on the same day, Joe introduces Vito to Mike Bruschi, who works with the stolen vehicles. Mike orders Vito to steal Walter Coupe, which is located in the parking lot of a bar in a district populated by black residents. Not without problems, but successfully, Vito returns with the car straight to the scrapyard to Mike Bruschi. The next morning, Vito's mother calls Vito, who spent the night at Joey's. She insists that her son go to the docks and finally talk to Mr. Pappalardo about a potential job opportunity. Even though Vito knows what he wants to do in the coming days, he still fulfills his mother's will. The main character of the game meets Derek Pappalardo and Steve Coyne. Derek eventually hired Vito because he knew the boy's father. The work turns out to be hard as hell. Vito, knowing that he has an alternative and does not have to work overtime for pennies, ignores this job, telling Steve that he will earn more at Joey Barbaro's company. These words leave Steve completely stunned. Steve immediately asks Vito what he's up to here. After all, no one from Barbaro would carry boxes to the docks for money. After explaining the situation, Derek again offers Vito a job, but a completely different one, and for a different amount of money. The new job is to collect protection money from dock workers. When Vito sorts things out for Derek and collects his payment, he learns that Joey called Derek and asked him to tell Vito to come to Freddy's. Once there, Barbaro informs his friend that a certain guy named Henry Tomasino will soon drop by and supposedly has some well-paid job prepared for them. This task turns out to be stealing petrol coupons, which are in the safe of the price regulation office. Vito has to handle this alone. Although the task is difficult, it is successful thanks to valuable data from the informant. Vito robs the safe and returns to Henry with the good news. Unfortunately, after looking at the coupons, Henry notices that they have a short expiry date. To get paid, Vito has to get his ass into the car as quickly as possible and try to sell the coupons at several local gas stations before the clock strikes midnight. The next day, right after waking up, the main character reads a note in which Joe asks Vito to come to Freddy's bar in the evening to discuss the next operation. This time, the target is a jewelry store where there are some really valuable items. Sadly, the plans are thwarted by an Irish gang led by Brian O'Neill. Thanks to this rather ill-considered move on the part of the Irish, the police quickly found out about the robbery and almost immediately showed up at the store. Vito and Joey flee the crime scene while not only saving their lives, but also their freedom, while the Irish end up in jail. Vito begins the next day by saving the honor of a woman who was involved in a car accident in the parking lot near Joey's apartment. A bit later, it gets even more interesting because Vito meets Luca Guarino, who is one of the capos of the Clemente family. Luca informs that another job well done by Vito will allow him to officially join the Clemente crime family. This time, the matter is really serious because it is about killing some guy. Henry provides more details of the plan to Vito and Joey. First, the gentleman must go to the veteran, Harry Marsden, who prepared a powerful MG-42 for the gentleman for this action. When the weapon is taken, there is nothing left to do but go to the destination, prepare the big gun, stay hidden, and wait for the target until the most appropriate moment arises. When it does, all hell breaks loose. It turns out that the target has large protection. When the entire herd of opponents is eliminated and only the target remains in the line of fire. Unfortunately, Henry is accidentally shot. He must therefore be taken to the Mafia doctor, El Greco. Vito gets very rich after this mission. The cash injection is so big that Vito is finally able to repay the debt made by his loved ones. After this long-lasting good streak, it was obvious that it would come to an end at some point. The action with the coupons comes to light. Vito is convicted and must serve 10 years behind bars. However, time spent in prison does not only bring bad things. In fact, Vito gets under the protection of the Vinci Mafia's consigliere. Leo Galante, the right-hand man of Don Vinci, becomes friends with Vito. The main character also fights boxing matches, which are very popular in prison. While serving his sentence, Vito learns about his sister's wedding and his mother's death. Scaletta also kills Brian O'Neill, who reminds him of his presence from time to time during Vito's stay in prison. Scaletta gets some solid lessons from Leo Galante on how Empire Bay's criminal underworld works. Leo also proves to be extremely helpful in getting Vito released from prison early. Well, Scaletta leaves prison 4 years before the end of his sentence. He is released, and a completely new reality awaits him. Some things, however, don't change. After leaving prison, Vito reunites with Joey almost immediately. Barbaro stayed quite active in business while Vito was serving his sentence. Namely, he joined the ranks of the Falcone crime family. Therefore, Joey quickly introduces Vito to Eddie Scarpa, aka the underboss of the Falcone family. Due to Vito's release from prison, the gentleman prepared a surprise for him. The destination of the trip is a gentleman's club. During the celebration, Scaletta receives a job offer from the Falcone family, and as it turns out, the first job will be available at any moment. When Eddie and Joey are completely drunk and leave the club with Vito while driving, it turns out that the trunk of Eddie's car is not empty. Vito therefore drives to the old observatory where Eddie wants to bury the body in the area near the building. The next day, Vito is woken up by Marty, Joey's errand boy. Joe has enormous sympathy for Marty. It also turns out that Eddie bought the pipes wholesale and commissioned Barbaro to go to several places where the pipes could be sold with profit. While trading goods, a couple of friends are threatened by a local gang who demands shares in the cigarette business. Joe rejects the offer, and so the opponents set Joey's goods on fire, and as compensation, he breaks the head of one of the gangsters. A chase begins after the rest of the gang, which fails due to the very fast cars that the rivals have at their disposal. Eddie is furious. It turns out that this gang of greasers has been causing problems for some time now. Eddie tells Joey and Vito to meet with Steve, Derek's lackey, to sort this out. The greasers learn a big lesson. After all this mess, Vito and Joey take the precious rides so that they can give Eddie the money for the failed cigarette-selling operation. Sometime later, Vito meets Eddie at the bar, where Vito is introduced personally to the Don of Falcone Mafia, Carlo. He asks Vito what he thinks about the Clemente family. Since Vito has no good memories related to either Luca Guarino or the Clemente family in general, he says directly that he doesn't like them very much. It's a good thing because the Falcones are about to organize an assassination attempt on the Clemente Mafia. Before this happens, however, Carlo Falcone asks Eddie to introduce Vito to the further details of the task, which, as it turns out a moment later, involves tracking Luca Guarino to find out where Clemente's emissaries who kidnapped the Falcone family accountant along with his bodyguards went. Although the task is difficult, it is going according to plan. Vito rescues his men and Luca Guarino is killed. After this action, the main character is handsomely rewarded and officially joins the Falcone family, becoming a made man. Later on, Carlo Falcone discusses with Vito the plan to get rid of the Clemente family, thus anticipating the evil intentions that the Clemente family has towards the Falcone family. Joey and Vito plant a bomb that is supposed to explode at the Clemente family meeting in the hotel. The gentlemen in the hotel also meet an old friend from the time they worked for Clemente, Henry Tomasino, who may soon be in the last moments of his life. A bomb explosion causes chaos. Unfortunately, the Don of the Clemente family, Alberto, miraculously escapes death. Joey and Vito chase their target, making their way through the crowds of enemies scattered throughout the hotel. In all this, the Clementes kill Marty, whom Vito did not want to take to the action and who was very important to Joey. The only good thing about all this is that Alberto is captured soon after, which seals the considerable success of the entire operation. Joe cannot deal with Marty's death. Shortly after that, Barbaro falls almost unconscious in one of the bars and accidentally kills the owner. But fortunately for him, this action has no consequences in the end. Sometime later, Henry Tomasino, who escaped the bombing unscathed, appears at Vito's door. Henry asks Vito if he will vouch for him because he wants to join the Falcone family. Vito helps his former friend, whose first task is to kill Leo Galante. Vito, hearing this, decides to warn Leo, to whom he owes so much. Henry discovers Vito at Leo's mansion. Despite Eddie's order due to the current situation, Henry agrees with Mr. Galante, who eventually leaves the city escorted by Scaletta. In the meantime, Vito also deals with his sister's husband Eric, who beats his wife from time to time. Afterward, Vito tells his sister that if Eric does not change his behavior towards her, he will simply kill him. Frankie is terrified. She doesn't recognize his brother and breaks off contact with him. To make matters worse, the Irish set Vito's apartment on fire as an act of revenge for Brian O'Neill. It also comes to light quite quickly that Brian's cousin, Mike Desmond, was responsible for this action, and Vito catches up with him almost immediately, assisted by Joey. Shortly after, Henry asks Joey and Vito to meet up. Henry has an extremely lucrative plan related to drugs. Even though Vito is afraid of how their boss will react to everything, he eventually agrees to take part in it. Money is tempting, especially after the last action of the Irish, after which the protagonist has to live in some den again. Henry wants to obtain the merchandise from the Chinese. In turn, the gentlemen are supposed to get money for drugs from the Jewish loan shark Bruno Levine. Police officers unexpectedly appear at the place of the transaction, and as Henry rightly notices, they are not police officers at all. Once again, an initially simple task turns into one big battle for life. Fortunately, despite the shooting, they manage to obtain the drugs and, with the help of black gangsters, distribute them throughout Empire Bay. The action ends with a great success, which seals a great profit. The celebration is in full swing. Unfortunately, Henry informs Vito and Joey that Carlo Falcone found out about the transaction and wants $60,000 of a fair slice, which may be problematic due to the debt he got from a Jewish loan shark. The boys go to meet Henry to discuss everything. However, while there, Vito and Joe witness Henry being cut into pieces by the Chinese. In revenge, the friends arrive at the Triad headquarters and commit a huge massacre, including killing the high-ranking Wong, who reveals that Henry was allegedly a police informer, and that is why he suffered such a fate. Vito and Joe know they're deep in shit. Nevertheless, there is no point in whining, and they need to get down to work. Since Bruno has to be paid first, Joe arranges a quick, well-paid job for Eddie, which involves cleaning out the key witness, Thomas Angelo, known to us from Mafia 1. A bit later, Vito goes to the docks to check if Derek has any well-paid job. It turns out that Derek is looking for a team that will help calm down the rebellious dockers. During conversations with the dock workers, it is revealed that Derek and Steve are responsible for the death of Vito's father. Vito decides to kill Derek in a blind rage. The main character of the game then searches his office, where he finds almost his entire share of the debt owed to Bruno. While Vito collects the money, he then tries to contact Joey, who has disappeared without a trace. The trail is discovered only by Giuseppe, who tells Vito that Joey was taken away by people from the Vinci family. When Vito arrives at the Mona Lisa restaurant, which belongs to the Vinci Mafia, he learns nothing and is also knocked out. Vito is taken to his friend. The mighty Frank Vinci is furious at what a mess it has become after all these imprudent moves by Joey and Vito. Vinci is most angry about the action with the Chinese when Vito and Joe have left a pure bloodbath. However, the men barely manage to survive all this. They break through crowds of opponents and visit El Greco because Joe can barely stand on his feet. Vito also gives Bruno the money. Soon, Vito is visited by Leo Galante. Leo meets Vito with a representative of the Triad, Mr. Chu. He repeats the same thing as Vinci. Vito's actions made everyone very unhappy and attracted the attention of the feds, mainly thanks to Henry, who, according to Mr. Galante, was truly a snitch, and it was Vito who helped him after all. But luckily, for old time's sake, Leo Galante offers Vito a deal to kill Carlo Falcone, who is hiding in the observatory. Vito, knowing that he has no choice, agrees. Another huge massacre occurs. When Vito breaks through the last enemy troops, it turns out that Carlo has bribed Joey. Immediately after this, there is another plot twist during which it turns out that Joe did it as a trick because he is still on Vito's side. Carlo Falcone dies, and then Leo comes to pick up Joey and Vito. On the way to the gentleman's club, suddenly the car that picked up Joey turns on the crossing. Leo comments on all this by saying that he is very sorry, but Joe was not part of the deal. Be sure to stay with me longer by subscribing to this channel and remember to rate the video. In the meantime, thanks for watching, take care, and see you soon.